Have you been told you need to stop doing what you love, whether it's exercise, running, or a sport? Well, here at Dynamic, we don't like that answer. In this podcast, we'll talk to leaders in the health and wellness space from Southwest Florida to get the solutions you need to get you back to doing what you love. Welcome to the Dynamic Naples Podcast. So I was in the clinic the other day, and I was working with an athlete, and I had him do the couch stretch, which is like a very deep hip flexor stretch. And he had this classic sign that I see that happens to a lot of people, where he gets into that position. So think he's kneeling against the wall, so leg against the wall, and then his other leg is propped upright. So he's doing like a really deep hip flexor stretch. And he said, it kind of tweaks my back. I see this all the time. So I said, okay, squeeze your glutes and your core. And immediately it took the pain away. And of course he wanted to know why that was. So I explained it. And then I said, we need to stabilize, then strengthen, and then dynamically strengthen. I'll get into later what exactly was going on there. But that little phrase, stabilize, strengthen, dynamically strengthen, is something one of my professors said to me in grad school, and always stuck with me, and it always made a lot of sense to me. And it's part of why I named my company Dynamic. These ideas of stability and strength and dynamic strength, I mean, they're all strength at the end of the day, but to categorize them in this way can be helpful. I read a quote somewhere, I believe it was Gray Cook, who's a physical therapist, and he said, strength enhances our ability to create movement. Stability enhances our ability to prevent movement. I love that. Right, so I kind of took that and I wanted to add a little bit to it. So I would say strength enhances our ability to create movement. Stability enhances our ability to prevent movement. Dynamic strength enhances our ability to do both at the same time. Think of stability like this. If you're just standing there and someone suddenly throws a heavy medicine ball at you and you catch it, if you don't fall down, you basically create a counterforce equal to that of the medicine ball. That means you have adequate stability for that task. Strength, I mean, I'm not going to waste any time with that one. I think we all know what strength is. Now, dynamic strength, this is, like I said before, the ability to do both at the same time. So imagine you are, I kind of think of this as like coplanar movements too, or complex movements, really just being a human. So think of if you had to unload something heavy from the trunk of your car, and you maybe brace your core because it's really heavy, and you maybe get into a little bit of a squat position. You grab whatever it is out of the trunk, and then you have to rotate your torso a little bit, but your legs have to stay stable. So your legs are creating stability, and your torso is kind of doing the movement. That's what I consider to be dynamic strength. So not just isolated, movements you see in the gym. This is where you apply the strength and stability together to be a normal human. I always think of American Gladiators. I don't know if I'm remembering this right, but there was one event where they would have the gladiator and the competitor staying on these platforms and had these like big, jousts, or no, I don't know what they're called. They look like giant Q-tips, and they're trying to knock each other off the platforms, and the platforms are all wobbly, and it created a huge challenge. Now, if one of them didn't have a wobbly platform, they'd obviously have a huge advantage, and that's, to me, that's the stability component. Or think of the difference between standing on one leg on even ground versus standing on one leg on a paddleboard, right? It's obviously going to be way more difficult on a paddleboard. It doesn't matter how strong you are. If you don't have the stability, it's just going to be a way harder task. So as it turns out, these stability muscles are, generally speaking, they're postural muscles, whereas strength is more of fast twitch muscles. And, in most traditional PT clinics, that's generally what they're going to be working on is stability of the joint for most cases. One of the problems with a lot of gyms is that most of the gear there is set up for more of the just good old-fashioned strength. Because, a lot of gyms are initially for vanity purposes, but, things are changing and the equipment's changing. But so now you can do a lot more stability type training in a gym. For a long time, this is what created kind of imbalances. I don't even want to really use the word imbalance. It's a little bit misleading. More of a discrepancy, or one group being stronger than the other group, and they can't perform together enough. So let's take the shoulder, for example. All right, rotator cuff, classically weak. All right, so if that's an undertrained muscle, and then all the other muscles around the pec, the deltoid, the lat, if those are really strong, great. But then they kind of take on the role a little more because the rotator cuff is supposed to stabilize the joint, kind of sucks the ball into the socket. That's kind of what it's supposed to do. And if that's not adequate, and you're lifting something heavy to grow a big deltoid or whatever, a lot of the surrounding bigger muscles are going to have to take on some of that work, and they tend to get irritated with that. I probably spend about half of my day just calming down people's pecs and lats. So training the postural muscles is definitely a good idea. And I kind of see that, stabilized strength and dynamically strengthened spectrum is kind of a way to progress things. So I think it's a great idea, even within one workout, maybe you start off with some of those postural muscles first, move into more strength, and then go into dynamic strength. So let's take the shoulder, for example. You could start off with some rotator cuff work, some scapular retraction, things like that, to kind of prime the engine a bit and get those muscles a little more awake and some blood flow to them. And then you do, maybe your deltoid strengthening and any surrounding musculature, lat pull, things like that. And then you go into sort of coplanar movements, something like a wall ball toss or like a lunge with a rotation, things like that. Obviously, it's not a rule, just one suggestion, one thing I tend to do a lot of, and it seems to work pretty well. So let's get back to my original thought. The athlete I was working with who had some pain in the back when stretching his hip flexors. So it's something I see constantly, if I have someone on my table and they're on their stomach, and I go to stretch their thigh, and I bend their knee, and they get a little back pain. I say squeeze your glutes, squeeze your core, it goes away. That's a sign to me that something in the anterior chain of the leg is stiff. Probably hip flexor, could be rectus femoris, which is technically a hip flexor. And as I pull the slack out of that joint or out of that musculature, it starts to tug on the spine because of its attachments to the vertebrae. So, actually, psoas major and minor do attach to the sides of the vertebrae of the lumbar spine. So it can pull the spine forward in that position. If you have some instability, that is to say a lot of movement of your spine, it goes into a lot of extension of the spine. A lot of people tend to be extension sensitive, whether you have maybe a little arthritis in the low back or stenosis, or even just the muscles might be stiff in your low back and you're just pulling them to a stiffer position. Regardless, what you'd want to do is obviously get more flexibility in the anterior chain of the leg, but also on the other side of the coin, you want to try to stabilize that lumbar spine some more. So something like an anti-rotation or what's called a Palloff press is probably a good idea, eventually. So that'd be like how you stabilize it. Then you'd want to strengthen those back muscles, so something like a deadlift. And then you'd want to dynamically strengthen it. So picture maybe a unilateral row, like you're staying in a lunge position and you're rowing while twisting your torso. I think that's a great way to hit those muscles with some dynamic strength. So there you go. There's the difference between stability and strength and dynamic strength. If you haven't yet, go subscribe to our YouTube channel. The link is in the show notes. I've got tons of exercises, over 1,000 videos in there of all different types of ways to stabilize, strengthen, and dynamically strengthen. And you can search playlists by joint too. So check that out. Anyways, that's all I have for you this week. I'll be talking to you guys soon. Why guess when you can test? Do you get hangry or crash after a carb-heavy meal? These could be indicators that there is a dysfunction in your blood glucose regulation. If left unchecked, it can lead to irreversible changes. If you catch it quick enough, you can make diet and lifestyle changes that will get your levels where they need to be. 88% of Americans are pre-diabetic and don't know it. Diabetes underpins many of the pathologies we deal with in this country, such as obesity, high blood pressure, heart disease, and stroke. For some reason, it is rarely screened with your physician, and if they do test for blood glucose, it's usually with an A1C or a fasting glucose, which can sometimes give you a false negative. NutriSense is a company that supplies continuous glucose monitors. We've paired with NutriSense to get you real-time data to see how your physiology responds to glucose. The NutriSense app lets you track your daily activity to see how food, sleep, exercise, and stress impact your glucose. You can log or import this data into the NutriSense app to see the effect on your blood glucose levels as soon as it happens. Use the code DrChris25 for $25 off your order today. Do you have unexplained pain, or do you wonder just how healthy you are? When was the last time you had your blood tested? Blood chemistry analysis is a great tool to stay ahead of any health conditions, and now you can have control of your health with Let's Get Checked. Let's Get Checked is an incredible company that sends blood tests to your home. You can choose from over 30 different tests, whether that's thyroid function, testosterone, micronutrient, cholesterol, or C-reactive protein, which is a marker for inflammation. It is sent to you with free shipping, and you get your results in 2 to 5 days. No physician referral needed. Use the code DPT25 for 25% off. You can find links in the show notes. Did you know that you can get started with physical therapy without a physician's referral? Physical therapists don't just solve pain, we get down to the root cause and keep it from coming back. We also discuss all things health, such as nutrition and lifestyle changes. If you feel that you could use some help, let's get on a free consult call. Go to www.dynamicnaples.com and sign up for a free call. Also, if you like this podcast, please give us a rating wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us spread the message. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.